We was in the lobby and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
It's like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the
Planet probably.
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion. Because we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking plane blew. And we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary.
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one.
Third explosion after that.
That's right. Everybody was inside the building, waiting to go upstairs, and they just let loose. Everything just let loose inside the building.
So what you told me is that there was a plane or whatever hit the building, then a secondary explosion.
It was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. And they exploded. And the whole lobby collapsed on the lobby inside.
And it's just mayhem after that.
Just man, everybody tried to make their way out.
Just trying to help all the brothers get out.
A lot of people was trapped inside.
people don't understand. There may be more. Any one of these fucking buildings could blow up. This ain't done yet.
What do we do? We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
If they were
detonated,
planning to
yeah.
take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
Just ran up West
And then you just sort of this cloud of shit chasing you down.
Couldn't
Just
outrun
ran
it.
up West Street. I couldn't outrun it. So what'd you do? I jumped behind a battalion car. I hid under the car.
You want to call your mother or something?
You gotta get back from here.
I know that.
You gotta get back.
All right. Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now. All right.
The 4-1 should have taken for a couple of companies that they were leaving back to us that were stuck in the tunnel. So that's, they might be busy doing
No gas, another. Hours after the attack, many smaller explosions rumbled through downtown.
Keep your eye on that building as they're coming down.
Airplanes in Washington. There is a large fire at the Pentagon. The Pentagon has been evacuated. And there is, you can see what happened. The second tower, the top was collapsing.
Once you have seen Building 7, there is no way back. You can cheat on yourself, and you can try to suppress it, but you cannot. You have seen it, and then there's no way back. It's not very healthy, to lie to yourself.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. It seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because they don't really know where to turn. That's the very sad thing. I think there's going to be a lot of very, very traumatized people that has hit them very, very hard.
Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan.
Some
evil is just, it can't be explained.
Are these people happy? Are they joyous now? Are they celebrating?
Oh, absolutely. They're
Thank
celebrating.
God.
There's one report, this has not been confirmed, but there's several reports that there was a cell, one of these cells, across the Hudson River. And they got on this is the report. I emphasize, I don't know this for a fact, but there's several witnesses who say this happened. They got on the roof of the building to look across. They knew what was going to happen. Yeah. They were waiting for it to happen. And when it happened, they celebrated. They jumped for joy.
In the days after 9/11, while Ground Zero continued to smolder, millions heard Dan Rather and various media outlets repeat vague and unconfirmed reports of arrests that took place that day. These rumors held that Middle Eastern men, presumably Arabs, were arrested in explosive-packed vans in various places around the city on September 11th, and that some had even been photographing and celebrating those events. What most do not realize is that those reports were not mere rumors, and we now have thousands of pages of FBI, CIA, and DOJ reports documenting those arrests.
My binoculars, and I could see the towers from my window, and this is where I'm looking, and all of a sudden down there I see this van parked, and I see 3 guys on top of the van, and I could see that they were like happy, they didn't look shocked to me, they didn't look shocked.
The men were spotted shortly after 8:46 a.m., yet somehow at this early stage, just minutes after the first plane strike on the World Trade Center, they were already positioned in a parking lot in Liberty State Park, taking pictures of the towers and celebrating. They left the scene shortly after being spotted, and at 3:31 p.m. the FBI issued an all-points bulletin advising officers in the greater New York area to be on the lookout for a white 2000 Chevrolet van with Urban Moving Systems sign on back. At 3:56 p.m., the van was spotted traveling eastward on State Route 3 in New Jersey and pulled over by Officer Scott DiCarlo and Sergeant Dennis Ravelli of the East Rutherford Police Department. Inside they found 5 men: Sivan Kurzberg and his brother Paul, Yaron Schmel, Oded Elner, and Omar Marmari.
A major terrorist manhunt began, and just 6 hours after the attack, the van was stopped at a roadblock by Patrolman Scott DiCarlo.
We were asked to detain the van and the passengers. They were just removed from the vehicle, patted down for safety precaution, and detained.
911 call at 410 Park.
I think once the FBI arrived, one of them stated that they were on our side, something to that effect.
According to the police report of the incident, Sivan Kurzberg told Officer DiCarlo, "We are Israeli. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem." Their official story: they were just Israeli tourists working for a moving company who had heard about the first World Trade Center strike and rushed to get a better view of the events.
They told interrogators they were working for Urban Moving, a shipping and storage firm run by an Israeli businessman who often employed Israeli students without work permits. The men say there was an innocent explanation for what was found in the van and their behavior on 9/11. They were, they say, simply on a working holiday.
We heard in the news that one of the plane was crashing down the building, and we thought it was an accident at the beginning. So we went up to the roof of Urban Moving, and we saw the building burning.
There is a better view from a building in Jersey that is up a hill, a straight line to the World Trade Center. We decided to go up there. It's like 2-3 minutes from the office. Stand over there and take some pictures. Everyone wants a picture like this in his camera.
Although this narrative is still trotted out when the story of the dancing Israelis is raised in the media, it is an easily demonstrable lie. FBI reports confirmed that the men were not taking somber pictures of a horrific event. When their 76 pictures were developed, they revealed the men had indeed been celebrating, smiling, hugging each other, and high-fiving. One of the pictures even featured Sivan Kurzberg holding a lighter up, with the burning tower in the background. And these were no ordinary tourists. Oded Elner had $4,700 stuffed into his sock. They lied to the police about where they had been that morning. They were carrying plane tickets for immediate departure to different places around the globe. The FBI confirmed that 2 of the men had ties to Israeli intelligence and came to suspect that they had indeed been on a mission for the Mossad. And of course, after returning to Israel, Elner claimed on national Israeli TV that they had been sent there to document the event.
And at that point we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
Their purpose was to document the event? But how could they possibly have known what event they were documenting at that point? The FBI reports show how the men gave confused and often conflicting accounts of when and how they learned about what was happening and when they arrived at the parking lot. Oded Elner even said they had arrived there shortly after 8 a.m., which would have been 45 minutes before the attacks even began. This is in line with one of the eyewitnesses that had placed their Urban Moving Systems van at the parking lot at 8 a.m. How could they have been in place and ready to document the event unless they knew what was about to happen? Any way you cut it, this story is unbelievable. Men with documented connections to Israeli intelligence and working in the United States without appropriate permits were detained after having been caught celebrating the attack on the World Trade Center at a time when no one knew that the WTC strike was an attack. So surely these men are locked behind bars to this day, right? Surely they were transferred to Guantanamo and held without trial for 15 years as part of the war on terror, weren't they? No. They were immediately transferred to federal custody, held for 71 days, and then deported back to Israel. The owner of the Urban Moving Systems company that had employed them, Dominic Suter, was investigated by the FBI too. They concluded that Urban Moving may have been providing cover for an Israeli intelligence operation, and even seized records and computer systems from the company's offices. When they went back to question him again on September 14th, he had fled back to Israel. And what about the dancing Israelis' pictures themselves? The Justice Department destroyed their copies on January 27, 2014. And these intelligence agents on an intelligence mission who were there to document the event of 9/11 before anyone knew 9/11 was taking place? Don't worry, they were just spying on Arab terrorists. But this story is not merely preposterous on its face. Even the implications of this story are themselves preposterous. If indeed the official story is a ridiculous lie, then are we to believe that these crack Israeli Mossad operatives, who were presumably aware of the attack that was about to take place, had been sent to photograph the burning tower from a parking lot across the Hudson River? And that these specially trained intelligence professionals on their super-secret mission were celebrating, high-fiving, and going out of their way to be noticed in performance of their task? This is equally preposterous.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. Evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they are in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
Beyond the 60 apprehended or detained and many deported since September 11th, another group of 140 Israeli individuals have been arrested and detained in this year in what government documents describe as, quote, an organized intelligence gathering operation designed to, quote, penetrate government facilities. Most of those individuals said they had served in the Israeli military, which is compulsory there, but they also had, most of them, intelligence expertise and either worked for Amdocs or other companies in Israel that specialize in wiretapping.
The most phenomenal part of this report is not that it was eventually erased from the web by Fox News itself, but that it ever made it to the air at all. In December of 2001, Fox News investigative reporter Carl Cameron filed an explosive 4-part series that went in-depth into an Israeli art student spying ring that had been under investigation before 9/11, extensive Israeli wiretapping of sensitive U.S. government communications, and the 60 Israeli spies that were detained in the wake of the September 11th attacks. Unsurprisingly, the story was quickly dropped, and no mainstream journalists dared to continue probing into the matter. This is the real story of Israeli spies and 9/11. Not some vague rumors about some dancing Israelis, but an FBI dragnet that swept up the largest foreign spying ring ever caught red-handed on American soil. And although the FBI were convinced that these spies knew about 9/11 in advance, their investigations were stifled and the issue was swept under the rug. Rather than making Israel enemy number one in the war on terror, Israel remains to this day the U.S.'s most important ally.
And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected president, the United States will reaffirm we have a strong and enduring national interest in Israel's security.
In 2001, weeks after the attacks on New York City and on Washington, and frankly, the attacks on all of us, attacks that they were perpetrated by the Islamic fundamentalists, Mayor Rudy Giuliani visited Israel to show solidarity with terror victims. I sent my plane because I backed the mission for Israel 100%.
But perhaps this is understandable. After all, we all remember how Yasser Arafat gloated about 9/11 and said it was good for Palestinians, right? Oh wait, that wasn't Yasser Arafat. It was Benjamin Netanyahu.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "We're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq."
My name is Donald Trump, and I'm a big fan of Israel. And frankly, a strong prime minister is a strong Israel. And you truly have a great prime minister. In Benjamin Netanyahu, there's nobody like him. He's a winner. He's highly respected. He's highly thought of by all. And people really do have great, great respect for what's happened in Israel. So vote for Benjamin. Terrific guy, terrific leader, great for Israel.
Given that the ultimate consequence of 9/11 was the beginning of a now 15-year-long struggle to transform the Middle East, a struggle that the neocons that went on to populate the Bush administration had been openly advocating since the clean break policy paper in the mid-1990s, it isn't hard to see how the September 11th attacks were indeed a boon for Israel. But information linking Israeli spies to advanced knowledge of 9/11 remains classified information. In a world of true justice, the dancing Israelis and other Israeli spies with insider advanced knowledge of the 9/11 attacks, who openly celebrated those attacks, would be the targets of the war on terror, not its beneficiaries.
What else do we know about 9/11? Marvin Bush, the head of Securicom, the company that did digital security for the towers, and his dad was George Bush Sr., who was hooked up to the CIA, which is one of their intelligence branches. A little over a year before September 11th, an Israeli art group named Gelatin, which is also coincidentally the name of high-powered explosives, began an ongoing project on the 91st floor of the World Trade Center to add a balcony to one of the floors. You can even see here in the Metro, which is a daily newspaper that people hand out like the subways in the morning, they even did a little write-up about it. You have a picture down here of them working with all these boxes stacked around them, talking about the group Gelatin and working on their project, the B thing, which I suppose, according to them, is B for balcony, which I would suggest after these next few slides might stand for something else. Now, if you look a little closer at this picture, it says BB18 on it. Now, BB18 is a popular fuse housing for when you have a million wires and you need to organize them for something. I don't know how many wires you would need to put a balcony outside, but my guess would be 0. Now, one night, while they were working on this, they went to a whole bunch of floors and put E-Team, showing that they had access to all these floors. They lit up floors 90 to 94, where the first explosion happened on floors 93 to 99. After this was all done, they published a 62-page book about it, which is extremely hard to get, as you can imagine, which includes pictures of them doing it and all about it, and then some of their sketches. Now, keep in mind, these are supposed art students, okay? Now, I know art doesn't always mean drawing. It can mean many things, but nevertheless, these look like the scribbled-out blueprints of a heist or something shady. Here's one with the tower. It says, very depressing inside, very amazing outside. All right, that's weird. We want to break through to the amazement from the inside. Okay, like a bomb breaking out. And it says depression inside, amazement outside. And here's the second sketch of a building basically starting to crumble with debris falling all around it. Now, this isn't shady at all, guys. Here's another sketch of someone jumping out of the Twin Towers. Here's a sketch, and there's a lot of them. The creeper, I'm going to show a few of the towers and then all the lower levels behind it. On the top here, it says, God, bring airplane food. Right next to it says, last chance to open a parachute. If you go down here, it just says a whole bunch of creepy stuff. Highest worm population. All right, so this is a sketchbook which shows a crumbling tower, and it shows the towers here with a hole where their balcony supposedly is, but is it says, bring airplane food. The only pictures of them are standing next to 100 fuse boxes that are used to rig up things like, I don't know, bombs. Their name is gelatin, which is a high-powered explosive, and is called the Bee Thing, working on the exact same floors where the first explosion hit.
Gene, you're saying that you didn't see anything initially. You didn't see a plane actually approach the building.
I had no idea it was a plane. I just saw the entire top part of the World Trade Center explode. So I turned on the TV when I heard they said it was a plane. Right. It was really strange.
So you've probably heard me in past videos talk about math, and I do math all day long, and I'm a mathematician and all that. Well, that is because I am a skyscraper engineer who has been building skyscrapers in Manhattan for 17 years. So I have to say, if there's ever been anything I've been more qualified to speak on, it's the collapse of the Twin Towers. Now, first things first, those buildings were tanks. I mean, those might have been the two sturdiest, strongest buildings on the planet. Now, majority of buildings get most of their strength from the core, around like the elevator shaft. That's where the heaviest steel will be, and it'll come up the middle of the building. And it creates like a spine. So this is where most of the strength from the building comes. Now, if you look at the Twin Towers, they were built like that, like every other building. They were also built with an exoskeleton of some of the heaviest steel in any building in the whole city. To make even anything other than a dent, let alone a hole that size in those buildings, you'd have to drive an aircraft carrier into them. A plane like that would just shred itself like paper, would barely even enter the building. The majority of it would crumple and would just fall down to the ground. I don't care how much jet fuel's on board. I don't care what. Look at this airplane being scrapped here. Look at this thing going through it like paper. They're nothing. They're little tin nothings, these planes. There is no way on earth that thing could blow a hole into the most solid building ever created. And this is everyone's favorite theory. It says it's pancakes. The building just pancaked. It's like cringe every time I hear that. First of all, that's not even what pancaking looks like. When floors pancake, the horrible occurrence that this is, they stop. They go floor, 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 floor. So look at this video right here. If you can see briefly, there's a lot of smoke. It drops the floor and stops for a second. Then it drops again. Look at this one collapsing. It collapses a floor and falls over. These are the two most common occurrences with a pancake. It either goes floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop. Or it hits the floor and then falls over. The only thing that would have ever happened with those buildings, a steel building no less, so pancaking usually happens with a reinforced concrete building, not a steel building in the first place. But the only thing that would have happened is that it would either the top would have dropped the floor, dropped the floor, dropped the floor, dropped the floor, and you would have seen it in a horribly slow fashion, and eventually would have just hit the ground, or what would have most likely happened, it would have fell a floor and the whole top would have fell off onto the street. But neither of those things did happen, did it? No. It free fell. There's only one thing on Earth that can make a building free fall perfectly into its own footprint, and that's controlled demolition. Period. It's not even up for debate. And then World Trade Center 7, which everyone wants to dismiss. Meanwhile, this is a building that would be one of the tallest buildings, if not the tallest building in most of the states in America. It's like an afterthought. Didn't have a hole in it where the top floor could have pancaked. No, it had fire. It had fire debris, supposedly, inside. The fires weakened it. And did it start to crumble from the fire? No. Did it fall over? No. Did it pancake? Obviously not. It also fell in free fall speed, perfectly into its footprint. I mean, how are we still even talking about this 18 years later? Furthermore, if you look into 7, you can see this video where the squibs are popping. It's exactly what happens in the controlled demolition. That's them. They cut the inside beams, and then they have bombs to go off one by one. And you can see them blowing out the windows of the building as they're exploding, first collapsing everything, and then it falls. Also, you have Silverstein in this interview saying that he gave the order to pull it, which is the only terminology for pull it is a controlled demolition. Okay, pull it, and then they hit the thing and it collapses.
Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Here you have a FEMA worker being interviewed about the horrors that he's helping to clean up in the city, and he states that he arrived the night before 9/11.
To be honest with you, we arrived on late Monday night and went into action on Tuesday morning. And not until today did we get a full opportunity to work the entire site.
So let's just think about this for a second. FEMA arrived in New York Monday night before the attack. This was 100% a planned attack. This guy's doing this interview on Wednesday, September 13th. He talks about arriving Monday night, goes through Tuesday, and then mentions Wednesday. So he didn't mess the days up. They were there the night before, ready for this event. What was happening in this classroom on the morning of September 11th? Well, they were having the whole class recite kite, hit, steel, plane.
Get ready, kite. Yes, kite. Get ready, hit. Yes, hit. Get ready, steel. Yes, steel. Get ready, plane. Yes, plane. Get ready, must. Yes, must. Go to your speaker reader up from under your seat. Open your book up to lesson.
Oh, there's George Bush. And there's him getting told that the country is under attack. Right after the class recites kite, hit, steel, plane. What happened right after September 11th? They signed the Patriot Act, giving away everyone's privacy. Fun fact, the Patriot Act was actually mostly drafted by Joe Biden in 1995. So quick recap. Joe Biden is the one who drafted the Patriot Act. John Brennan is the one who approved the visas for the supposed hijackers. And Robert Mueller is the FBI director who conducted an investigation into 9/11 that led nowhere. It's funny because all I ever hear about is the Bush connections. It's almost as if they're controlled by the same people. So what else happened on September 11th? Well, the day before, Donald Rumsfeld had announced that they were missing $2.3 trillion. Well, wouldn't you know, it was the Budget Analyst's Office where they were, quote-unquote, looking for this $2.3 trillion that exploded the next day, or the flight that went down in Pennsylvania. You can see the crater right here. Well, there's the two wings. Well, what they don't tell you is that that crater was there already. The only thing that's new is the bomb hole in the middle.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble.
An hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower.
It just went ba-boom, it was like a bomb went off. And another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
No, the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were two explosions.
Okay. Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
Then there was secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
That the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
It sounded like gunfire, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden 3 big explosions.
About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall.
And we heard the noise associated with an implosion.
We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us.
We heard a loud explosion, and at that point, Building 2 was collapsing.
At that point, we heard a large boom. I looked up and just saw the building coming at us.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it came down.
All of a sudden, you hear explosion, and you could see the building starting to collapse.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
According to the Associated Press, another building that has either been attacked or exploded.
The tower, rather, that has collapsed, we are told, collapsed because of a third explosion.
And about an hour later after that, there was a huge explosion at the base of the South Tower. That's One World Trade Center, and part of the building collapsed.
We could hear a rumble, which was about 5 seconds long, preceding the actual collapse, and then a boom when each of those towers collapsed.
Just seconds ago, there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the Second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions.
And then you heard from far away, boom, boom. And you heard the boom, 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 boom.
Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah, detonated.
If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
From the corner, boom, 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 boom. Just like 20 straight hits. And as the bombs were going, people just started running. And I sat there and watched a few of them explode. And it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers.
No second plane. It was a bomb. Bombed in all the building, not second plane. That was a bomb.
We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. And I turned to Hesh. I said, this is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here.
So one name that keeps coming up through our 9/11 investigations is Larry Silverstein and Silverstein Properties. And why that's interesting is in April of 2001, Silverstein Properties took out a lease, a 99-year lease for $3.2 billion on the Twin Towers. Now, there was a few other smaller buildings in that lease, but the major part was the Twin Towers, 210-story buildings. There was like building 4 and 5 or something. In spring of 2000, so about a year before he signed this deal, the Twin Towers were valued at $1.2 billion. So you go, 99-year lease, $3.2 billion. Yeah, there's a couple other small things, but it's the Twin Towers. Now, the Twin Towers a year earlier were valued at $1.2 billion. So, I don't know, something strange there. So Silverstein Properties and Larry Silverstein already owned somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 million square feet of real estate in the New York City area. That included Building 7. Now, Building 7 really keeps coming up as something strange through this investigation because Building 7 went down in a free fall. Why did Building 7 go down in a free fall? It was reported that the fires in Building 7 caused it to collapse. The fires in Building 7 caused Building 7 to go into a free fall. That's got to be scary. It's got to be scary for people working or living in high-rise buildings, that if there ever was a fire, that building would come down free fall. Has that ever happened anywhere before in the world? There's been fires. None of them have ever come down free fall or tumbled or the top half tilted over. None of them. Yet on this day, 3 buildings for sure come down in free fall. We've seen it with our own eyes. It was on television. It's not somebody's opinion. It's not a calculated number. We've seen it live. Building 7 housed the SEC, which is the Securities Exchange Commission. Among things, they investigate wrongdoing in the financial district. At this time, there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 4,000 cases being investigated. In those cases, 2 of the major companies being investigated were Enron and Global Crossings. All these investigations going on. Building 7 comes down, and lo and behold, all that investigative material, all those documents, all the information, all gone. And then shortly after, maybe within a year or so, you have all these companies filing for bankruptcy. Well, that's interesting because probably most of the information that could be of conflict is now gone. Now we need to look into what were these buildings insured for? How much were they insured for, and what did he collect? And it goes deeper because every time I start looking into it, then I find out it wasn't his money that he put in to lease the buildings. He borrowed that money from GMAC. Everybody knows GMAC. You buy a Chevrolet or something, it's financed by GMAC. So they lent him the downstroke for the lease, which was $400 or $500 million, somewhere in that area. You had to put a downstroke for the lease. So not even his money, borrowed it from GMAC, took out insurance on the buildings, insured the Twin Towers for $3.5 billion. So one of the insurers, industrial risk insurers, they agreed in May of 2002 to pay Silverstein $861 million for his policy covering Building 7. Now, there's talk about how much he had invested in the building. It was nowhere near that. It was, in the end, when you do the math, he made out like $500 million. Now, at the time, the U.S. was either close to recession, the market was going nowhere, and it was just about time to say the R word, but they weren't that. So why would a developer in a recession or close to it, where usually the financial, which those buildings were full of financial insurance people in a recession, you're the first to go, so office space for rent, so you're going to pay $3. Now there's some beautiful facts. He's battling 22 insurance companies over the payment. He wants $3.5 billion per building, so that's $7 billion. The insurance is only willing to give him $3.5 billion, which is still $0.3 billion over what he leased it for. That's not enough, so, and he's confident the courts will settle with him. Find out for yourselves. I don't know. What did he get? I bet you he got more than 3.5, because that's what they offered him.
So Larry made out pretty well. Silverstein Properties turned their $14 million investment into $5 billion in only 49 days. But apparently that wasn't enough for Silverstein, because years later he battled the airline companies for an extra $12.3 billion.
Law school paid off for this guy. He's learned, like he said, the lawyers control what's in the contract. That's why he wanted to be a lawyer.
While you were at NYU, you were working part-time with your dad.
That is correct.
And in leasing of these small spaces and everything. And then you decide that you want to go to law school. Why do you want to go to law school?
Well, because in observing the transactions which my father was involved in leasing these spaces, it was the lawyers who made the decisions that affected whether or not a deal was going to get done. And so my thought was become knowledgeable with respect to issues that lawyers deal with, and as a result be a better, more proficient, more able real estate broker.
So every morning, Larry would have breakfast in Windows on the World with his tenants to discuss their leases. And just so happened to be at a dermatologist appointment the morning of September 11th. How convenient. His 2 children also happened to be running late that day. Interesting. Now, I have to mention there's this popular clip of Silverstein talking about Building 7, saying, you know, there was a tremendous loss of life that day. The firefighters didn't think they could put out the fire, so we just decided to pull it.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
So this is interesting because there's been some debate about whether or not he meant pull the firefighters from the area and then just watch it burn. But if you rewatch the clip, he's clearly talking about the demolition term, pull it. You can call your local demolition company if you want, but they'll tell you that the term pull it means to physically pull a building down in the direction you want it to fall, so it's not going to fall on a building you don't want it to or whatever. But that's not something you can easily do with a 47-story building, and that's not what we see in the videos, so the official story is bogus, and so is Silverstein's. But the interesting part to me is when he talks about the old Twin Towers and basically says their design quality was so poor, that's why they collapsed the way that they did. But we know this is a lie because they were built to withstand multiple impacts from jet airliners, and it wasn't the jet fuel that turned 98% of the building into dust. You can watch our documentary to learn more about that. But yeah, there's something up here, all things considered. 6 weeks and you make $5 billion. You just happen to be at the doctor's that day, and your kids just happen to be late for their meetings, and you believe that jet fuel can turn 210-story buildings pretty much into dust? Okay.
It's important to realize that the towers were designed for airliner impacts. John Skilling, the structural engineer in charge, said that in the event of an airliner impact, quote, the building structure would still be there.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
So if you haven't seen our 9/11 documentary, Where Did the Towers Go?, the second edition is up now, and it proves that this NIST report that Silverstein was a part of is totally fraudulent, and Dr. Judy Wood has already filed a qui tam case for science fraud against all these companies.
This is the elephant in the room that nobody wanted to talk about. And this is one of the documents, a 61-page DEA document that I went over and over and over and connected Israeli Mossad bomb experts to an art group that were traveling around the United States and to an art group that gave themselves the name of Gelatin. Okay, now I'm going to take you to Dick Cheney. Just listen up. You're looking at those pictures. Those are some Israeli art students that came from a foreign country, and their art project was called B-Thing. They called their team the Gelatin Group. And just so you understand this, gelatin is often referred to gelignite or blasting gelatin. It's also referred to as blasting jelly, but gelatin, and they later on changed their name because people started waking up to this. So they named their name Gelatin. They called